Hey you guys, welcome back to my Flickers of Fear movie review series. Been waiting a long time to do this one. It finally got added to Amazon Prime for free, and I was super jacked because I've been wanting to do this one like forever. So if you guys remember, I don't even remember how long ago it was, but it was a while back that I did a review of Ty West's 2022 retro slasher movie X, which I absolutely loved. I thought it was fucking great. Now, what a lot of people didn't know was that at the time that X came out, Ty West had co-written a script with Mia Goth, the actor that's in it, for a prequel to X, and he was like while he was working on it, and then he even started production on the prequel right after filming of X had wrapped up, utilizing all the same sets. I'm imagining much of the same crew, but I'm not really entirely sure. The sets were actually in New Zealand, but obviously, if you've seen X, you know that it's set in Texas, as the prequel is also. And honestly, I wouldn't have been able to tell the difference. That actually surprised me that it was New Zealand, but it is. So the prequel that we're talking about today is called Pearl, subtitled An Extraordinary Origin Story. And it came out the same year as X, like later on in the year, distributed by A24, obviously, and kind of got the horror community in a buzz, as X had prior to it, but in a kind of completely different way. Because X, I mean, that kind of had that gritty, realistic 70s grindhouse kind of feel, like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which was an obvious influence on it. Pearl kind of went, this was kind of ballsy, I thought. They kind of went in like the total opposite direction, just kind of utilizing those big wide vistas and super saturated technicolor and real sweeping orchestral musical scores and the kind of idealized hyper real fantasias of like golden age cinema, mainly like The Wizard of Oz, which is a very obvious influence on Pearl, or kind of classic live action Disney movies like Mary Poppins, or maybe even something like Gone with the Wind. Now, admittedly, this does sound like a kind of a bonkers premise for a horror film on paper, but goddamn, if it didn't work like gangbusters in execution. Actually, when Pearl came out in late 2022, a lot of critics called this one of the best films, not just best horror films, but best films, period, of the year. And that is actually an opinion I have no disagreement with whatsoever, because I thought this was fucking great. So, anyone familiar with the movie X will know that Pearl was the elderly villain of the movie. She was kind of this bitter, sexually frustrated old woman who viciously murdered, the younger people on the farm that were there shooting a porno out of essentially like jealousy and hatred. She's kind of crazy too. So Mia Goth played the elder Pearl in X under such amazing makeup that you would actually be forgiven for not realizing it was her, because I didn't know it was her until afterward, and like when I looked it up, and I was just like, holy shit, like that's a great makeup job. But Mia Goth also played obviously a completely different character, Maxine Minx, who is sort of like a mirror to her, but she was like one of the younger like aspiring porn actors in X. Now, the third film in the franchise, incidentally, is going to be released about a month from when I'm recording this. I believe it's July 5th or something like that of 2024. And it's just called Maxine with 3 X's in the middle. And that'll obviously focus on Maxine from X a few years after the events of that movie. Because X took place in 1979. I believe Maxine is going to take place like in the early 80s or something like that. So the movie Pearl, then, tells us the origin story of the murderous woman, the murderous old woman from X, but obviously she's much younger in this one, and kind of delves into the psychological and environmental factors that may have made her the way she is. I'm going to say, because it's a prequel, obviously, if you've seen X, it's not going to hold any surprises, or many surprises, really. We know Pearl is going to become a killer, because obviously, and we know that she survived into old age, obviously, because she was in X when she was a very old woman. But I think the prequel did a really good thing by focusing on just being more like this very strikingly emotional, as well as like really kind of brutal character study of Pearl herself, kind of just exploring like the dark recesses of her mind, and maybe even like the tragic outcome of a nature nurture dynamic that just went horribly horribly wrong. So gonna say, and you know, I think everybody that's reviewed this movie has said the same thing. Really, the whole kind of beating heart of this story is this just the completely astonishing like central performance of Mia Goth. She is fucking fantastic in this. This is a legitimately award-worthy turn. I'm not even being facetious about that or anything. She absolutely should have gotten an Oscar nod. And really, and I've talked about this before. It's like too bad, even in this day and age of 2024, that Oscar voters are still so reluctant to recognize actors for their work in horror, which, in my opinion, I'm not an actor. If anybody is, you can maybe tell me if this is the case or not, but I had always had the perception that horror is one of, if not the most difficult genres to work in, like as an actor. I could be wrong about that, but that's just how it seems from the outside. You know, I'm still pretty salty that Toni Collette didn't even get an Oscar nomination in 2018 for Hereditary. So, you know, I'm kind of pissed about that. And the same thing kind of applies here. Mia Goth is just fucking magnificent in this movie because she has to, you know, the character that she's playing, she has to walk this really delicate tightrope between being this real naive, starstruck farm girl who kind of just longs for greater things, which of course is very relatable to a lot of people, and then veer into this psychotic, violent monster who can't regulate her feelings and, you know, lashes out savagely when things don't go her way, and has to make her intriguing enough to watch and also kind of sympathetic to the audience. And she does that really, really well. And I think one of the things that makes it work is because her character is tragic. You know, and this is kind of very, very well conveyed in this amazing, and like I said, a lot of other reviewers brought this up too, but there's this amazing 7 or 8 minute monologue where Mia Goth is just like talking. She's actually talking to her sister-in-law as though it's her husband who's away. And so she's kind of spilling all these feelings that she had about him. And it just gets more and more, you know, kind of unhinged, like, as it goes on. And it's just the range of emotions in her face, and just, it's fucking fantastic. And it's very organic, like the way that it comes out. She's fucking great. But the tragedy of her character is that, I mean, Pearl has only ever wanted love and wanted to escape from this humdrum existence. Like, she wants to be someone special. Like I said, a lot of people can relate to that. But the sad thing is she's also very, very keenly aware that there's something deeply, horribly wrong with her. Like, she knows she's not like other people, but she desperately longs to be normal. She desperately longs to fit in, but also to kind of be greater than, you know what I mean? And she starts to become, like, as the movie goes on, kind of increasingly distraught as she starts to realize that her family and friends and stuff are actually, like, terrified of her because they can see, like, what she is and what she's becoming. And she's kind of, like, powerless to fight this escalating madness within her, like, no matter how much she struggles to fit in and, like, try to make her mark on the world. And I think that's what makes her such an intriguing and, like, heartbreaking character to watch, is that she knows that she's losing it and she can't really do anything to stop it. Oh, and since I mentioned that monologue, which, again, that should have probably got an Oscar nomination all by itself. I was just riveted the whole entire time. Allow me in passing to also bring up that fantastic, fantastic shot under the end credits of the movie, where we just basically sit and stare at Mia Goth's face as she has this, like, really unsettling, very teary-eyed smile, and it just kind of gets wider and more unhinged, like, as it goes on, and you're just, like, staring at her the whole time. It's very, very effective. It's, like, really a sensational sequence. Like I said, kind of ballsy to end the movie on that, but I thought it was fucking great. And again, like, her acting is just impeccable. So the story is actually set in 1918, and it uses the backdrops of the First World War and the Spanish flu pandemic. And it was a big influence. They called it Spanish flu because they said it came from Spain, but it didn't really, whatever. It actually came from Kansas, now that I'm thinking of it, if I'm remembering that correctly. But they called it Spanish flu because, you know, that's how you do. Because, you know, foreign. But yeah. So it uses those two things as a backdrop, you know, which, you know, has a great thematic effect. So Pearl lives on a farm, in fact, the same farm that she's still living on in X when she's old. And she lives there with her parents. Now, her mom is this very, very stern, very emotionally cold German woman who has absolutely no time for nonsense, and it's implied kind of gave up her own dreams a long time ago in order to kind of buckle down into, the practical drudgeries of her life, right? Now, Pearl's dad, it's, again, this isn't stated outright, but I thought that this was what the implication was, has been ravaged somehow by the pandemic, so he's just kind of languishing in a wheelchair. He can't really move. He can't really talk. He's aware, like you can see his eyes moving around, and he kind of knows what's going on, but he can't talk or move around, so he has to be, continuously cared for. Now, Pearl clearly loves her dad, but, it's kind of implied that she sort of resents, like, taking care of him or, like, help take care of him. Not surprisingly, though, her and her mom are really just at loggerheads, like, all the time. Mom doesn't have any time, like I said, for Pearl's constant daydreaming about becoming a star of the movies. She actually tells Pearl at one point that, you'll never be happy until you focus less on what you selfishly want for yourself and more on making the most of what you have. And I mean, obviously there might, there's a lot of truth in that sentiment, I guess, but on the other hand, Mom in this movie, not really the first person I'd go to for advice about happiness, because, I mean, she's essentially just this sour old bag who uses her suffering a lot like a cudgel, to, like, belittle her daughter's aspirations, as delusional as they may be. So Pearl is actually married to a young man named Howard, who is the same husband that she has in X when she's elderly, though he's played here by Alistair Sewell, so I think it's a different actor. So her husband is away fighting on the front lines of World War I, like I said. Pearl seems to have kind of a complicated relationship with her absent husband. You see her, like, reading letters from him and stuff like that. So she clearly misses the emotional connection and the physical intimacy on the one hand, like I said, because they don't explore it a great deal in this movie. But if you saw X, I mean, she's very sexually frustrated. And they kind of go into that a little bit here, although it's kind of more subdued. But at the same time, she seems to hate him for leaving her, and sometimes wishes that he would be killed in battle so she can be free of both him and the farm and just her life in general, so she can, bust out on her own. There's actually one really striking scene in this where Pearl steals one of the eggs from the alligator's nest. This is Theta, I'm assuming named after Theta Bara, because all the animals are named after, silver screen movie stars. And I think it's the same alligator from X, because didn't somebody get fed to an alligator in X, if I remember correctly? So, this could be the same alligator. They do live a long time. But she has the egg, and then she, like, crushes it in her hand, and then at the same time she's imagining her husband, like, walking up the path to the farm like he's returning from the war, and he just, like, explodes. So you can see that what her thought processes are, like, about her complex feelings about him. Now, at the beginning of the movie, we feel a very sympathetic affinity with Pearl. She seems adorable and charming, if a little bit awkward. She's a little off. But we can, most people can relate to her fantasies about rising above your humble origins and becoming, bigger than life. Like, a lot of people have that, right? It's not weird at all. But even from the jump, it's obvious that the girl isn't right. You know what I mean? Like, only a few minutes into the movie, for example, she stabs this goose to death that just kind of walks in and looks at her, like, walks into the barn, with a pitchfork, and then throws it out to the alligator. And again, like, while her ambitions to stardom are understandable and even, like, endearing, they also stray a little bit too close to being delusions, So early on in the movie, Pearl rides her bike to town, like, to pick up her dad's medicine, and while she's there, she goes to the movies. And this is kind of like a secret little pleasure that she indulges in every time she goes to town. Like, she doesn't tell her mom about it, obviously, because she thinks that's a bunch of bullshit. But every time she goes to the movies. Now, after this movie, which was Palace Follies, like all the dancers and stuff, she meets this handsome young projectionist, who I don't think is ever named. He's just called the projectionist. And she eventually will become more involved with him, including sexually involved. And he also later shows her some stag films, which is a nod to the porn angle in X And interestingly, the stag film that they show in here, it's a real stag movie. And I was like, as soon as I saw the movie, I was like, I've seen that. I have this DVD that has like all these old timey stag films. And actually, a long time ago, I went to the Museum of Sex in New York City. This is years back, and they were doing a they had like a whole one of the floors was all like old stag movies, and they had them like playing on the walls and floors and stuff. And I think this was one. It's quite a famous stag movie, but yeah. So they use it in here. Now, Pearl also has a seemingly pretty close relationship with her sister-in-law, whose name is Mitzi. But she seems to have some resentment toward her as well, because Mitzi, and by extension, Pearl's husband Howard, has like wealthy parents, and Mitzi is kind of like a young, pretty blonde who has things come much easier to her than they do to Pearl, at least from Pearl's perspective. Now, it's Mitzi, in fact, who tells Pearl about this dance audition being held at the local church. Like, the church is putting together this troupe that's going to tour around the state, like a troupe of dancers that will tour around the state for the holidays and, like, do shows for people in, like, a bunch of different cities. So Pearl just latches onto this opportunity. This is going to be her potential big break. Like, this is going to make her a star. And so she, like, builds it up in her mind as this one thing that's going to get her off the farm and just launch her into the fame that she feels that she deserves. Of course, her mom forbids her from going, thinking it's just a ridiculous waste of time. And, pretty cruelly, like, tells Pearl, yeah, you're going to fail. But Pearl is like bound and determined she's going to be a star and no one is going to stop her. Now, since we know, if we've seen X, how Pearl ends up as like a serial killer, essentially, it's not a spoiler to say that things don't quite go the way she planned. And along the way, she causes just a disgraceful amount of carnage. But the thing about it, like I said, and Mia Goth in this character, is that she remains very, very human the entire way through. Like, we don't condone her actions, of course, because they're appalling, but we understand them. Like, we understand her, and we understand how someone like her could wind up in this dark place and end up doing these horrible things, given you're led to assume that she had something probably wrong with her from the beginning, you know what I mean? And then her environment didn't really help anything. But like I said, it's a testament to Mia Goth's acting that she still retains the audience's compassion in spite of the monumentally fucked up things that she does in this movie. So yeah, obviously Pearl is a very different movie than X. Whereas X was kind of like a smart retro slasher homage, with more layers going on the surface. I kind of feel like Pearl is kind of a more psychological, character-based horror, and I think it's all the more emotionally resonant and devastating for it. The films kind of shine on their own merits, of course, but they also complement each other perfectly in spite of them being like just wildly different styles and having just these really divergent influences. Now, while it isn't as over-the-top gory as X was, Pearl does have some gruesome scenes, particularly in the third act, including what I think might be the most realistic, very close-up beheading that I've ever seen in a film. I don't fucking know how they did it, but it looked really, really real. Like, there's one part, like I said, this isn't a spoiler, she's cutting someone up, like, toward the end, and it's done in very, very high def close up, and holy crap, it looks really, really real. I'm like, is that actor okay? I'm just, you know what I mean? It's like, it's really good. But yeah, I mean, in spite of all that, like, the big draw of this movie is the character of Pearl herself, like, just the whole heartbreaking entirety of her as a person, as she just spirals down this tragic, into this slippery insanity that she can't overcome, like, despite how tenacious she is. So in case you couldn't tell, I loved every single frame of this movie. And what's more, it actually, and this is the best thing that a prequel can do, it made me love X even more, like, in light of its revelations about Pearl as a character. And now I'm even more, like, I was pumped about Maxine before, like, coming out next month, but now I'm, like, even more, like, 100 times more pumped about it. So, when that comes out, I hopefully can go see it in the theater, so look for a review of that in, like, a month or two or whatever. But, I mean, if Ty West and Mia Goth can hit that third movie out of the park, I kind of feel like we might have the very, very rare treat of a horror trilogy in which every film of the series is completely brilliant, while still being its own distinct story, like doing three completely different things, three completely different subgenres, but still all working together like as a set, and that's amazing. I can't really think of hardly any other trilogies in horror that can say that. But like I said, I haven't seen Maxine yet, but it looks really good, so fingers crossed. So that will do it for this Flickers of Fear. Hope you enjoyed the video. Please like, share, subscribe, and comment if you did. And I'll see you guys again on the next one. Bye.